Your Help presents Stress-Free Living with Ray Samich and Mr. Stress-Free Ratanjit S. Sandhi. This audio program is an unscripted and unrehearsed conversation between Ray and Ratanjit. It is shared with you in hope of adding value to your life. We encourage you to listen to this program in its entirety to receive the full impact of its message. Sit back, relax, open your heart, mind, and soul to this edition of Stress-Free Living.
Welcome to Stress-Free Living. I'm Ray Samich, and I would like to introduce you to my dear brother and our co-host of Stress-Free Living, Ratanjit Sandhi. Ratanjit, how are you today?
Wonderful, Ray. How are you?
I'm excellent, thank you. Delighted that we are doing this program on a recorded basis this evening because of some travel commitments, so we don't have our regular Zoom audience, but we are delighted that we are with you, wherever you may be listening, however you may be listening to us today. Ratanjit, after our last call, because we usually do have very interesting conversations with our Zoom guests during calls and after our events, our live recordings, somebody brought up about knowledge, and you said that there's something very interesting. You said there's a difference between knowledge and knowing. And I think that is a unique thought that you have, because I would guess that the two of those are considered synonyms. They're considered to be the same thing. If you know something, you have knowledge of it. If you have knowledge, then you know it. So you seem to think that there's a difference between knowledge and knowing. So thought we would talk about that today. What is the difference?
Well, see, if you go to school, college, read books, read newspaper, news magazines, attend seminars, attend workshops, these are all knowledge gathering places, right? Mm-hmm. And so whatever you are told, you haven't experienced it. Somebody else's experience, somebody else's belief, or somebody else is experiencing it and telling you, or many times even they haven't experienced it. So they have learned from somebody and they're passing on to you. And as a matter in that whole process, the real truth is not there, because it is known. If you tell a story, there are 20 people in a row, or you tell a story to this person and say, okay, you are going to say the verbatim to the next guy. And he tries to tell the verbatim to the next guy. By the time the even 10th guy recites the story has changed. Mm-hmm. So that is what has happened to knowledge. So we are living on borrowed half-truth or erroneous truths, calling it knowledge. And then what happens in today's time, marketing means you polish and submit your knowledge in a way which is acceptable to others. So you purposely modify knowledge. You deliberately modify knowledge. You creatively modify knowledge. So you use your creativity to tell a lie, a believable lie, and package it as a knowledge. So no wonder we have such massive, massive confusion. And then there is a very important issue. See, when you sit in an audience, in a lecture, and listen to some intently, very interesting lecture, your retention is only 20%. Because your inside Ray always knows the truth. it doesn't accept it because it hasn't experienced it. If you experience something, you have done it yourself, you have lived it yourself, that is your knowing. Knowing comes from living that knowledge or experiencing that knowledge yourself. So that is the main difference in knowing and knowledge.
I can't disagree with anything you've said at all. I in this day of the internet, which is all around us and it's so prevalent in our society, you can pretty much find any perspective and any related knowledge on any topic and any angle of knowledge that is out there. So you can, it really is hard to find the truth in a digital world because there's five versions of the truth for every topic. So that bears out what you're saying, for sure. What is the truth? Where is the real knowledge? But when it comes to historical information, and an awful lot of what we learn is based on history, whether it's history of things that happened over time, like the Civil War or the Revolutionary War in this country, or the life of Gandhi, or whatever it is of a historical nature. Don't we have to believe that what we're reading about those historical events is legitimate knowledge? I mean, something as important as those moments of history, we can't know those. We weren't there in those times. We didn't know those people or know those events, but don't we have to say that knowledge is believable?
See, there are certain things in that historic mention we must realize. First of all, history is written by a historian. And you have to realize that a historian has all those drawbacks of a human limitation that any of us have. So they see a certain perspective more so than other perspective. Of course, there are certain things about history, the date is correct, and the end result, who won the war or who lost the war, maybe on the surface it is correct, but in reality, many times the winner of the war ends up losing the war as the time shows. Mm-hmm. So the historian have not caught that. So history, again, we have to take with a grain of salt. And as long as we understand this, Ray, that if you are looking for a diamond in a dirt, so you have to also realize that dirt is around it. You have to pick a diamond. So you have to pick what your conscience agree with, which allows you, so you don't believe every aspect of the story or the history. You learn the lessons which are going to add value to your life. That's all history means. Because history doesn't mean I should hate somebody, I should take revenge with somebody who has defeated my ancestors, because that puts you on a wrong platform.
Right.
You waste your life taking revenge. So a lot of us create our animosity based on history, right?
Yeah, no, we do, for sure.
And the people who are ancestor of our so-called enemy have not done anything wrong to us.
Right.
Right?
No, yeah,
So,
you're right. Hundreds of years later, they're still upset about what happened centuries earlier. It doesn't make any sense.
so the question is there any purpose of this knowledge which is gathered by somebody else, written by somebody else, delivered by somebody else, or do we totally abandon it?
There has to be some value. We can't totally. I mean, especially when it comes to science. You're a scientist. You're a chemist by your profession. All of your training, education, and experience is in science. There's value, isn't there, to the knowledge that you obtained in terms of what chemicals and what combination under what conditions produce certain results? Isn't that knowledge something that we have to move forward?
Well, see, there's very interesting you asked this question. I'm a polymer chemist, I'm an organic chemist, I'm a biochemist. I've a master's degree in biochemistry and polymer, and then I was almost on my PhD. But very interesting thing happened to me. Chemistry, I'm not a likely person to be a chemist, because chemistry is all about remembering big names. And I don't remember any of these names. So my professor in organic chemistry was kind of a unique individual. And, I lived in I studied in Birla Institute, which was a residential university, very elite college in India. And everybody stayed in dorms there. So it so happened my dorm was a little bit further away. And by the time I get back to my class, by tying my turban and getting ready and all that, I would just make it in time when the class starts. So I end up sitting in the last bench of 15 or 20 students, whatever that was. So this professor thought these people who sit in the last bench are really skipping and they don't want to pay attention.
Mm-hmm.
So his lifestyle of our method of teaching was he'll write a formula on the board, not a structure formula, not the C2H5 or something like that. So, and then he say, okay, tell me what do you expect from this type of formula? What the qualities you expect from it? So then, last bench, so I was the only guy with a turban in my class. So I stuck out as a sore thumb. So I said, oh, do you know? So I have to think on the spot. And then I would basically had no background at that time. I had no knowledge of that formula, right?
Okay.
I have to dig deep in the fundamental of chemistry and drive my knowing through fundamental of chemistry and say, okay, if this is present, this molecule is present, this atom is present, this is, if it is attached near to because chemical reaction is all balancing of electrons. So once I understood that, I was able to give an answer. And so this is how I was taught. So what happens is our fundamentals are not clear at the very beginning, Ray. The fundamental truth is not given to us. Fundamental understanding of life is not given to us.
So let me try to clarify, because I think I got what you said, but I want to make sure our audience understands it too. These formulas you had never seen before, they were put up there, and then very quickly because you stood out because of your unique look with the turban, and he was picking on the people in the last row because he thought that they were not paying attention anyway, and they were not really interested. So, he was going to the last row, you were there, and then on top of that, you were the first one in the last row that he would call on because you had the turban on. So he would look at you, and so as soon as he put this up on the board, you're the first one to be called on.
Right.
You didn't know the answer because you hadn't seen the formula before. You were relatively new to chemistry at that time. But you knew enough about the foundation of how chemicals interacted that you could fall upon that foundational knowledge. And so you were usually able to figure out the answer.
That's all I had, Ray. That was the only thing I could fall back on because everything was stripped away from me.
But you say that as if that's, as if that was the only thing, but that should be the only thing, right? I mean, that should be anybody who gets in life just because they memorize numbers or they don't mean anything to them. They just have a brilliant memory for formulas or equations or whatever. That usually is going to get them in trouble sooner or later because you can't memorize everything all the time. And if you don't know what the foundation is, you have nothing left.
Well, see, today the biggest complaint about college student is they lack critical thinking.
Mm-hmm.
But how do you develop critical thinking? You have to challenge it. So this is when my professor challenged me to come up with an answer. I have to depend on my critical thinking. All my creativity, all my focus, all my energy was vested in from driving the knowing of that thing from within.
But you can only have critical thinking if you really understand the fundamentals of it. Because if it's like, I always enjoyed taking Latin, even though when I took Latin in school, people were laughing at me already because it was already considered a dead language. But there are so many words that we use that have a Latin origin.
Yes.
And so if you knew Latin, it helped tremendously with your vocabulary for English and your understanding of particular words because you could look at the origin word of Latin.
Yes.
It's a different topic with language, but I think it's the same concept that you're talking about, because if you have that fundamental understanding of chemical reactions, you were able to take that information and do critical thinking about a particular formula.
Yeah.
But if I didn't have that Latin derivative, there's no way that I would have known what Latin words, what English words based on Latin meant. I mean, it's impossible. And it would have been impossible for you to be able to figure out those formulas if you didn't have that knowledge to fall back on.
And then when I was at Akron U working on my PhD, we had to take coursework, and one of our Professor Harwood, and he was one of those guys who believed in fundamentals. So he said, well, look, our midterm exam, our test is going to be next Wednesday. He gave us a week's notice.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll give you all the freedom in the world. You can bring any books you want. You can go to the library after I give you the test. And you can spend as much time as you want to solve the problem. No time limit. So now he comes and writes on the board that in a flask, I added this chemical. And so he writes a description of all the steps he took. And at that point, I extracted this chemical. At this point, I heated to this degree. And so he wrote a sequence of event which he conducted in the lab. So then his final question was, so what is the end product which you expect, and what was the starting ingredient which I took, and based on what I described? So again, in our PhD class, there were about 10 students who were in that PhD program. And it took me 45 minutes, Ray, to decipher. And I wrote and walked out. And there were people sitting for a whole day. At the end, when the grade came, there were only one A, which was mine, and the rest were all F. And these are highly skilled, top student of their class, but they went after knowledge. They remembered things, memorizing reaction, memorizing everything. That is how our education system has. There are very few rare professors like Dr. Harvard. And that is what has happened to us in our life, Ray.
This is really interesting. Very, very interesting topic. We want to come back after this short break and talk more about this difference, which until this whole topic, this whole possibility was even suggested, I never thought there was a difference between knowing and knowledge. But as we are talking here in this first beginning of the show, there really is. And we're going to talk more about that distinction and what that knowledge for us and what knowing this for us can do for our acceptance of life, our levels of stress in our life, and our abilities to perform and add the highest value. We're going to talk much more about the difference between knowing and having knowledge when we return on Stress Free Living. Stay with us. Okay. So we went late, but that's okay. First one is important to do. We will still have, let's see, 14. 35, 49, yep, 2 14-minute segments left, so that's okay. Okay. I had a cough a couple times too. I just muted myself and coughed while you were.
Yeah, I saw that.
So you noticed it, but it was in the little picture, so I tried to out of the camera. You want to clear a little bit more?
Now good.
Okay, good. Okay, I'm going to reset. And go with 14 here. Okay, you ready?
Are you making any sense though?
Yeah. No, it really is. It's like I just said. I really didn't think there was that big a difference, but there truly is. I'm glad we brought up the school stuff because that drives it home. That's where you think about learning knowledge. So that really drives it home. That's good. Okay, we got lucky. We stumbled into chemicals and all of that. All right. We are back on Stress Free Living. Ray Sandwich with you and Ratanjit Sandhi talking about the difference between knowledge and knowing. And Ratanjit, you've just given some really interesting examples how back in your highest education classes, by having knowing, you were able to accomplish things and learn things and deduce things that people who perhaps had more levels of intelligence, certainly had more education, more training, and et cetera, but because they were relying on memory of knowledge as opposed to actually knowing, then they were not able to accomplish many of the things that you did because of knowing. And I think those are great examples that we can relate to. Let's move it away from the classroom, from that education setting, and talk about life.
Yes.
Because that's what we really need to know. We really need to understand what happens in our daily life. And when we do go through all the pains of life, especially as you get older and you've lived on earth for 40, 50, 60, 70 years, you've had a lot of opportunity to experience ups and downs, highs and lows, a lot of pains and sorrows along the way. I'm convinced that those sorrowful times, those painful times are some of the best learning opportunities in life. And that's when we really know, isn't it? Those are the things that really make us know what life is all about.
But Ray, if you think of it, when people are going through a difficult time, they generally have a habit of finding who is at fault. Why this happened to me? Because of this. And as a consequence of that habit, they miss out an opportunity to learn something under that circumstance. Because once you realize that every difficulty is given to you as an opportunity, and when that trigger comes in your mind that, look, this is an opportunity for me to learn. So what am I learning? What should I learn? So under those circumstances only, you learn. See, we do not live our knowledge, we live our habits. I've said that many times.
Mm-hmm.
But now, if your habits are formed under the umbrella of borrowed knowledge, which all the knowledge is borrowed, you will have erroneous habits. But if your habits are formed under the umbrella of knowing, you will have the right habits. So that is a fundamental difference which directs your life.
On the surface, that sounds great. Let's before we go there, and I know that's where we have to go, but I just want to explore what you said earlier, and then we'll get back to this because this is so important to get back to it. But I think it's also important to drive that earlier point home. The point that you said, I said, first of all, that when you go through pain, you learn a lot, and that causes you to know. And you made a very astute observation that by human nature, a lot of us don't accept that learning moment. Instead, we're focused on whose fault it is.
Yes.
And who I can blame for this. And trying to perhaps even shove the responsibility for the bad thing that happened on somebody else so that it doesn't come back to me. I don't look bad, or I don't feel as bad for what happened because it was somebody else's fault. And I have to agree with you that I've done that, and that I've seen other people do that. And I've never realized that was, among other things, a lost opportunity to learn and to understand and to gain a knowing opportunity because I'm too busy blaming or looking to blame somebody else.
Yes.
I wanted to reiterate that just for effect here, because we're all going to face challenges every single day at some level. And unfortunately, once in a while, they're real severe challenges, painful challenges. If we are so busy looking for blame, we lose the opportunity, maybe the best opportunity why that was even sent our way.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah. And so the opportunity to know something that might become a fundamental building block for the rest of our life, we've totally lost that because we've been so caught up in looking to blame somebody else based on probably erroneous knowledge anyway.
Right.
Okay, so I had to come back and repeat that with you, with your, I appreciate your patience in allowing me to do that, because that was such an important point. I didn't want to lose it. Now, let's move on to the other part. You said habits, just like that habit of blaming, and that's probably a really good habit to start with, because we you know, even when we accept responsibility, and I've joked about this in the past, how that makes everything right today. But even when we accept responsibility, we do it so fictitiously. We do it with so much, without commitment of what that really means to accept responsibility. It's just like, I'm going to say the words, I accept responsibility. Now let's forgive and forget and move on. And that's not taking responsibility, just to say the words. So we blame a situation, we blame another person, we blame some other element, and that's a habit, right? That in itself is a habit that we have taken, which has no value.
Yes.
Tell me some other habits that you think we have that are based on knowledge, not based on knowing.
Well, see, knowledge is somebody else's gathering, and you begin to believe that this is how it is. And then we selectively pick up from this smorgasbord of knowledge what is more appealing to us. We don't accept all that knowledge which is given to us either, Ray.
No, we want to pick what we want.
Right.
We want to pick what we like, what's easy, what we think we can do. Right. Yeah, so what's convenient.
And so it is, and that knowledge, by the time we begin to use it, is useless. Because first of all, it was never confirmed whether it's true, because knowing has not been vetted into it. And then somebody else's knowledge, and again, all this knowledge has given us a sense of false ego. Because, see, one thing we have not learned fundamentally growing up, because knowledge about me is also borrowed. Think about it. What I know about me is borrowed. Somebody told me that this is your race, this is your heritage, this is your... So I believe that this is, and somebody told me you are a separate entity, you are a man, and you are, and they showed, so all that is what I believe in. My race, my gender, my sex, my nationality, all these things are told to me by the world. I have not confirmed it. So a lot of people say, wait a minute, Ratanjit, I know I'm a male, I know I'm a female, but they did not went deep enough to realize that is the quality of the vehicle in which we are placed. That is not even me. So once you went through the knowing channel, you would know who you are. And that dramatically changes your everything in life. Once you know the truth about yourself.
So let's further that exact line of thought. If my parents, who are the first influences on most children's life,
yes,
or my siblings, my brothers and sisters, if I have older brothers and sisters, who also most likely were heavily influenced by the same parents, yeah, or another set of parents, maybe, but still by some parental figure. So they're just repeating whatever their parents said. If these parents don't understand the idea that our body is just the uniform, it's just the vehicle, it's not the real us, then the only knowledge that they have to draw from is what their parents told them.
Exactly. So
what their parents told them is that you're a man or a woman, you're white or you're black, you're whatever it is. And so at what point in time does somebody know what you're talking about, as opposed to repeat the knowledge, the erroneous knowledge that they were told?
Yeah. See, if the parents challenged us and said, look, the first thing you have to do is know yourself. So that's exactly what my mother did. He says, but don't I know? I'm Ratanjit. He says, no, that's what I called you. So that when I call you for dinner, John doesn't show up. So Ratanjit shows up. So that's not even your real name. So I said, oh, so what is my name? So that is what you have to find out. I don't know. So, so she challenged me constantly. Then I said, well I'm a boy. So she would say, but that is your human body. That's not the real you. And so she would neutralize it, but won't give me the answer. Because she wanted me to find that out from myself, knowing. So parents' role is not to give them answers, Ray. Parents' role is to make them receptacle of their own knowing, gathering your own real knowledge, which comes from knowing. Make them a student of knowing.
So if your mother would have even given you the knowledge that you are wearing a uniform and that isn't the you, that still wouldn't have been knowing, even though that is the ultimate truth.
Right.
It still wouldn't have been effective.
Right. It took me a lifetime to understand this, Ray. But she planted so strong questions. My mind was always thinking about this. What does she mean by that?
Wow. That's as intriguing, because as we're talking, I'm thinking I need to have this meeting with all my grandchildren. I have to explain to them, who we really are, and that we're all.
You're still giving them knowledge.
But that just passes on more knowledge, and that's just as non-productive as giving them other knowledge that isn't correct. But even giving correct knowledge isn't right.
See, the thing is this, we have been given the correct knowledge, but because we have this habit of picking up what is convenient to us, what is more glitzy, what comes out of this salesman type of a person, that's who we believe in.
Wow. All right, we are on Stress-Free Living, and this is a very interesting program today. I hope you are enjoying it as much as I am to be listening to Ratanjit and thinking about this very interesting topic. We have one more segment. We hope you don't go away. Stay with us. Stress-Free Living. We'll be right back. All right, 15. 21. So we still have 13 left, which is good.
These programs which you're doing now are much more intense than we did before, aren't they?
I don't know. I mean, this is deep. This is really, and you know what made this one really deep just now? I really was. I was really telling you exactly the truth. As you're talking to me, my wheels are turning and saying, boy, before it's too late, I got to get all my grandkids together and I got to tell them what it's my job. It's my responsibility. I have to give them this. And it never dawned on me that I'm just, even the right knowledge is still knowledge. It isn't knowing.
Yeah.
And so to teach them all this and expect them that they suddenly will know this and act that way doesn't do the job. So that's what I want to come back with right now. I want to come back with, how I would like to get that habits thing too. I'd like to come back to the habit, but I'd like to even start before that with saying, so what do we do with people that we want to share this with? How are we supposed to act? Are we just supposed to ask them questions? Are we supposed to have them doubt? Are we supposed to put doubts in their mind about what knowledge they have? That's what I want to come back and ask you.
Okay.
Okay. All right. We have got 13 minutes left on this show. Okay. And this is Stress-Free Living. I'm Ray Samich, Ratanjit Sandhi, and we're talking about the difference between knowing and knowledge, and the amazing just bit of information that Ratanjit shared just before we went to the break that said even trying to share knowledge of something that is absolutely correct and truthful still is not really beneficial, because the person that we're giving that knowledge to is simply being told knowledge. They're not knowing it for themselves. And so it isn't a matter of saying what's right and what's wrong, or what's correct and what's incorrect. It's talking about the very critical fact that we need to know things, not just hear them or read them. We have to live them. So with that idea, Ratanjit, if we do understand this, which for the first time I do, how do we effectively communicate with other people? How do we not just share knowledge, but entice them, inspire them to know it? What's the process of that?
Well, see, if we want to put our, you talked about your grandchildren, your sons and daughters growing up. So we have the best of intention. We want to give them everything. We want to make them knowledgeable. And we read books, and we before you go to bed, we sit down and read a book with them, right?
Sure.
And but we don't make them curious, Ray. And one thing we have to learn, that at the early stage, children copy your habits. They don't listen to you. They are using their brain, which is basically there are mirror neurons in the brain. That is what reflects your habits to them, and they copy them. And if you do not have a copy or a habit of working towards knowing rather than gathering knowledge, they will not copy it from you. You have to experience, you have to take them down to, if you are having them learn about nature, you have to expose them to nature rather than tell them what the nature is. And you have to become a student and let them teach you. You basically ask questions and let the answer come from within them. And they will answer absurd or something which may not make sense, but then you have to bring another question to them, slowly ask, and that's exactly what puts them on the path of exploring. See, all these great people who have succeeded, they went into exploring. When they started business, they did not know anything about their business. They learned from scratch. And amazingly, Ray, the so-called entrepreneurs, some of them are college dropouts. And there were no previous history of that type of technology or that type of product. How did they develop that product? Whereas there are so many conventional businesses who start with a knowledge game. We go to Harvard or learn everything and then slowly they at best produce mediocre duplicates. They don't produce anything original. So that all comes from knowing. So knowing doesn't just stop, to live a very fulfilling, complete life only comes via knowing, not by knowledge.
So a few minutes ago, you mentioned habits, and that, and we've talked a lot about habits. We've done shows on habits. We've got the 25 Habits for Success series that has been distributed by the thousands. So habits, we agree, are so important. But you said that most of our habits are based on knowledge.
Yes.
Not based on knowing.
Exactly.
Okay. So if knowing is an exploratory process, if it's experiencing it for myself and not basing that on what I've heard or seen or read, but it's learning it for myself, it sounds like that is a habit unto itself.
Exactly.
Okay. I have to have a habit of knowing, of learning how to know and learning through knowing, as opposed to learning through knowledge. But then how do I also put other habits based on knowing? How do you suggest we do that?
See, once any habit which comes through the channel of knowing, it is very easily able to replace the old habits, which were based on knowledge. So the thing is, it's a constant journey, Ray. So you have to begin with, you cannot totally discount knowledge. See, if I'm traveling, I have to find out, is this in a strange city? I have to ask somebody, where does this road lead to? So that is knowledge, right?
Sure.
So, I mean, you have to respect the knowledge in one sense, but at the same time, there always is a question mark in you because that's not known by you. So whatever knowledge you gain from books or reading, I'm not asking to stop reading. I'm not asking to stop gaining the worldly knowledge. But then the verification of that goes through, which validates the knowledge and becomes knowing. So some of the knowledge which appears to you correct may not be correct, and may be half correct, and somebody else has not totally understood it. So when it becomes knowing, you are able to understand that knowledge much more correctly. So then you don't have to memorize it. Anything comes via knowing is etched. You don't have to ever memorize. Knowledge you have to remember. Remember?
Yeah, well, it goes back to that fundamental chemistry, where now that's kind of etched in your brain because you experienced it, you lived it. It's not something that you read, that you memorized. It's now something that you actually have put into practice and you verified. I love your idea of even directions. Okay, I ask a stranger how to get to the post office, and he says the best way to get it is to turn right here and then go a half mile and then turn left here, and it's on the left side. Okay, I'm going to try to do that the best I can, and I'm going to follow those directions because that's the only thing I can do at that point.
If you follow the direction of the learning mode, then you are very vigilant whether you are going the right direction.
Correct. And you also, there is something in us that says, okay, I'm doing this, but maybe there is a better way.
Yeah.
And maybe there's a faster way, and you probably aren't going to try it the first time because you got there. But the second time or third time, if you have to make that trip, now I'm going to get a little adventurous. And now I'm going to see, gee, if I cut down this street or if I go this way, can I get there faster, simpler, with less turns or whatever it is? I mean, that is my nature to try to explore that. And I think that's what you're talking. It's not as something, that's an analogy. We're not saying that life is always by going to a post office, but if we sometimes we have to start with the directions that we're given. We have to start with the knowledge we're given, but then you want us to explore other options and verify.
See, not only that, Ray, if you are asking a local in a strange place about post office, maybe his understanding or her understanding of post office was different. They misdirect you to a different place.
Yeah.
Not knowing. So you have to be conscious of that. You have to be aware of that, not that you're doubting anyone. So that is why one of our covenant of our value system was in our company, the truth always need to be verified. And that itself becomes an experience when you start verifying the truth. Otherwise, you simply accept the truth. No, you have to verify. Until the truth is verified, it is not truth.
I mean, you're actually saying we have to verify everything. I mean, to know something, you have to verify, either start from scratch or verify the knowledge that was given on that topic.
Yeah.
I mean, we shouldn't be taking anything at face value. We have an obligation to go deeper than that.
Yes.
I mean, we're obviously not doing that. And in a world with so much knowledge handed to us, so much knowledge available all around, it's just so easy to find some knowledge to base everything that we do on. And maybe that's why we're more in trouble. Maybe that's why there is the state of emergency you referred to a couple of weeks ago.
Yes.
Because there's knowledge everywhere. We can just always point to something and say, that's why I'm doing this, based on some knowledge from some direction that I found on the internet that has no validity to it whatsoever.
Absolutely.
Wow.
And see, the thing is that because of so many things, and somebody said, Ratanjit, it's impossible to know everything. Are you going to verify every technology? You're going to go to the doctor and you're going to verify what doctor says? And so obviously, if you aren't able to verify, you have to accept the consequences.
Well, in that example, that's the best time that we should verify. If a doctor gives me a diagnosis,
yeah,
I'm going to do my best to verify that, because
yes,
it's my life in his hands at this point. I have an obligation to make sure that he's right or she's right.
absolutely.
You know? So, I mean, that's a perfect example of, yes, I am going to verify with, not that I have anything against doctors. I like them, I trust them, I believe them, but it's my life. I'm going to make sure that they're giving me the right diagnosis the best I can. So, you know, this is so interesting. Ratanjit, we're out of time. We can't continue this, but I know we need to. And this is part of what I just said a minute ago, which you brought up in the past. Are we at an emergency? Are we at an urgent state of life in looking for the truth, accepting the knowledge without knowing it? And we need to further this conversation and see if we are in this urgent state that you believe we are, and how we can quickly overcome it and get beyond this. And I think we've taken some steps in the right direction today with the difference between knowing and knowledge. Thank you so much for sharing your knowing with us and your knowledge that we don't have to validate, but we should. And I appreciate the love and perspectives and thoughts that you share with us all the time. Thank you, Ratanjit.
Thank you.
And we thank you for being with us for this edition of Stress-Free Living. Look forward to talking with you again very soon. Remember, folks, we're all playing the same game. We'll talk again.
Thank you.